I'm not very hopeful at this point, but
what happened in the last one was why I listened to stuff like Pantera, because there's two laptops that almost went through the window, just so you know. But.
Welcome to Music Musing. Every once in a while, my brother George and I would have these conversations about music. Music is our passion, and it's a huge part of our lives, and we decided to share those conversations with you. So if you love music, sit back and enjoy this podcast.
So today's rant, guys, I've actually been wanting to do this for a long time. I figured it'd be fun with you guys. So everybody's had this happen to them in their lives. You know, maybe you're growing up, you had this album that you really loved a lot, and then all of a sudden as you got older, you're like, oh, man, why did I love that album? That album really sucks. And on the same token, how about that album that when you were growing up that you really couldn't stand, and all of a sudden you get older and you're like, you know what? That ain't half bad, right? So that's the topic of our rant today. Albums you used to love, now you despise. Albums you couldn't stand back in the day, now you love. So I don't think it really – why don't we start with the ones that we used to despise and now kind of dig, right? And I'll let one of you guys go first. Whoever wants
I went first last time, brother. You get it. You get it this time.
This list was a lot smaller for me. I didn't have a whole bunch of I don't like if I don't like it, I don't really like go back to it like, oh, maybe it's not so bad type of thing. I had a few that, and I don't know why. Like I used to not like Blondie, and I don't know why, but over the years I've grew sort of like this, I will say an appreciation. I wouldn't say I love them, but there's just, and it's more with artists, I would say, than albums with me. Like I never really got like, I hate.
Oh no. Is he there? Is he gone?
Is he gone?
Is he gone? I'm taking over then.
Okay, take over. Hopefully he'll jump back in. George is having major technical difficulties today.
We grew up listening to my parents listening to ABBA, and I hated that album when it came on. Chiquita, would hate that song when it came on. You can pick any of the songs off that big hit where they're all sitting on the park bench. I can't even think of the name of the album right now, but I hated it. But now it is my guilty pleasure. I will put on the ABBA mix and just run with it. I will set everything aside and put my headphones on and take a chance on and just front to back. I'll even listen to it twice sometimes. But that was
Take
one of those.
A Chance on Me is magical, man. I'm telling you, and you're right with headphones with all those vocals popping all over the place.
And I did. As a kid, it kind of falls into the same way with Dr. Hook. My parents listened to the Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show, the album with the sun on it, and Sylvia's Mother was just one they played all the time, and I hated that song. But I go back to those now, and I look at the vocal talents they had in a lot of those bands back then. I mean, ABBA, obviously, they had huge vocal talent going back and forth in that band. And even listen to the two guys that sang for Dr. Hook, just both of them extremely talented and music writers and well-written songs. And I think I appreciate it more. I like ABBA a lot. I appreciate Dr. Hook a lot more. And I don't think I hate those albums like I did when I was a kid. My parents would just put them on and run them over and over and over and over.
Wonders of growing older, and all of a sudden it's like the music you thought was uncool is actually not too bad.
Okay, I finished Blondie, but for me, Blondie she looked punk, she sounded pop. Run.
Yes, there's more. I mean, I don't really there's no excuse for anything I've got to any of these bands, because I guess there was a reason I thought they were bad to begin with and never went back to them. So I had a very hard time trying to find something that I used to hate and now love, because I never really I'm not much for second or third chances type.
You're not listening.
Huh?
So you're not listening to the songs. You're not going back, man. Come on.
No, I know. And I guess because there's so much more happening, so much more new that if I don't hear it, if it doesn't strike me to begin with, I don't really go back, oh yeah, that's great. I'm sorry I missed that, and I don't know why. I mean, if somebody said, hey, you should really go visit, mine's more artists than necessarily albums, because over the years I've grew at least an appreciation for bands like Lynyrd Skynyrd and Aerosmith. I never cared for Aerosmith in the 70s, 80s, 90s growing up, and going back and revisiting. I mean, there's some good quality rock and roll that Aerosmith put out, and I was never a huge Aerosmith fan. So I mean, it's more of a band / sound for me than like albums that I loved or hated and went back and started to love again. So, but maybe you guys can speak to that or change my mind or give me some artists or albums that are worth listening to.
Well, while you're out, I used ABBA and Dr. Hook and the Medicine Show, because I hated those when mom and dad would play them over and over again, and now I love it. So,
see, I think it was always different for me. I always went for if I like it, I like it, and if I don't like it, I don't bother type of mentality.
I'm dying to hear what Pete's got. Go.
All right, so I took a little bit different approach. So for me, it was more like albums from bands that I liked, but I didn't like that album, right?
Like the Elders,
in
like
most instances. So, like, I was a huge Genesis fan when I was growing up, and I still love the band. But then they put out those couple of 80s albums, and I was like, oh, what is this? And I literally would refuse to listen to like Abacab or Genesis or Invisible Touch for forever. But
Invisible Touch,
yeah,
really? Okay.
Yeah, was never a fan of those albums. However, I have really softened my stance on them over the last couple of years, and I've actually given them a second chance. And you know what? Yeah, it's not the classic stuff with Peter Gabriel and even, Duke and all that kind of stuff. But there are good songs on those albums. I still don't think any of them are great albums by any means, but I have really given them another chance. Same thing with Rush, with like Power Windows and Hold Your Fire. I hated those albums back in the day because me growing up, Hemispheres, Moving Pictures, Permanent Waves, 2112, that's the Rush I loved. And then they came out with these real synth-heavy kind of poppy albums. I was like, I was a metalhead back in the day growing up, and that's all I listened to. I still love my metal, but now I've kind of been revisiting those albums again, and I'm like, you know what? They're good for what they are. They'll never be my favorite Rush albums or Genesis albums, but I can appreciate them for what they are now, and I can happily say I don't really dislike them anymore. So, so that's. And I have a few more, but I'll circle back to them.
Quick side note: better Peter Gabriel, better Phil Collins. Genesis.
I'm a Gabriel guy, but I love Phil.
Fair enough.
Yeah, well, and they're both so good. I mean,
I could. It's weird because you started mentioning things, and I started thinking. I think every '70s band that I liked, when they got to the '80s, if they were continuing to make music, I didn't like their '80s stuff. No, I'm serious. I started thinking AC/DC. Once they got past the Black album, the AC/DC album. Flick of the Switch was okay. Fly on the Wall was decent, and then you get like the later album. Yeah, I'm like Rush. You mentioned Rush. I went right straight to Rush too. I'm like, their '80s stuff wasn't that great. Zeppelin's later stuff they put out in the '80s was kind of questionable. Was '81 for the last one?
Into the Outdoor was that was 79, I think, right?
Oh, was it? Okay.
79, and the last one was Coda, but that was released post breakup and everything. But I mean, those two albums are not up to snuff of the rest of the Zeppelin catalog. And yeah, Flick of the Switch is a good example because that's on my list actually, because I think that at the time for me, Flick of the Switch was such a letdown after For Those About to Rock and Back in Black and everything else. But nowadays, I have a renewed appreciation for Flick of the Switch and all those other albums. And granted, they are all solid. They may not be the classics of the early catalog, but they're still pretty good. Whereas for many years, I would not listen to any of those other 80s albums from AC/DC. I was like, God, it's never going to be the same.
I'm exactly the opposite. Like when I was big into AC/DC in the 90s, that's what I listened to. Was all I listened to their albums all the way up to Razor's Edge, like nonstop. I listened back and forth. Now I go back and listen to this Flick of the Switch, and I'm like, what? Why did they do this?
See, that puts a different spin on it. Now that makes a lot more sense, because there's a lot of bands that I like that put out mediocre albums that I turn away from now, that I used to listen to because that's what they had. And if they put out a better album after that, or since, or more albums since, that one definitely does fall, and I think that would have to fall into the, I understand its place in their catalog, but that still doesn't mean, I don't like it the way I used to, but when it was all I had, it was, because if it was from a favorite band, I really enjoyed the album, but then by comparison to other albums, like, yeah, it's pretty much trash, or they mailed that one in. I do have some of those. I guess thinking of it in that context is definitely a lot.
An album full of filler.
Pretty much. Or some of them, I prefer like a lot of bands' early recordings. I like the rawness. I like when they don't have as much money for production and stuff like that. I really do. And I'm the older I get, the more I'm growing into like stripped down versions, acoustic versions, where it shows the actual artist's talents.
Again, good. I'm gonna talk over him again. I only really had he was really onto something too, because I think that I felt the same way. Like when Nirvana's Nevermind came out, I loved Nirvana and I loved that album, but I think once I heard Bleach, I really kind of pushed that album away. I really liked it when it came out. It's kind of like some of the newer bands I listened to, probably over the last 10 years. My Chemical Romance, I hated them when they came out, hated their sound. It didn't appeal to me at all. But I, like 3 or 4 years later, I picked up the album and put it on and listened to the whole thing, and I loved it. I fell in love with it. And that's kind of the most recent one I can think of. Other than all the hair bands from the 90s, I loved those albums when they came out. They were amazing. Have we switched over yet? We haven't switched over yet, have we?
Not yet.
Dang it. Okay, I'll go back to My Chemical Romance. I hated it when it came out. Loved it when I just listened to it recently. And that's another run song album that I can just put on and kind of run to it. But I hated it when it first came out. Just was not something I would listen to.
Yeah, it's I always think it's kind of cool to rediscover something that you didn't really care for originally. But to George's point, sometimes you don't like it when you first hear it, and you never want to revisit it again. You're like, it didn't work for me 10 years ago. Why should I try again, right? But that's why for me, a lot of my examples are bands that I actually do like, but really didn't like that particular album, and just was like, I didn't listen to it for like 10, 20 years. And now I go back, like I have Blue Oyster Cult Club Ninja, which is a pretty, it was an album that they caught a lot of flack with in the mid 80s, but you know what? It's really not that bad. It's not nearly as bad as I think a lot of people remember it. And I got also the Rolling Stones Steel Wheels on here because I was not a Stones fan at all. I went to see them live. That album was really big return for them. I was like, whatever. Now I realize it's actually a really strong album and that I really love the Stones. But it took me like probably 5-8 years after that album came out to really discover that, you know what? I actually do like these guys, because I grew up as a kid hating the Stones.
Really?
I never liked the Stones. I never liked the Stones until probably like 1994 or 5.
They were lukewarm to me. I wasn't a huge Stones fan. But I'm gonna have to go back and listen to that Steel Wheels album, because I have discounted that pretty much my entire life.
It's pretty strong, actually.
It was at a time when I was listening to the hair bands, and that was really what was important to me. And that came out in the early 90s, right?
89, actually.
Early 90s, late 80s.
Yeah, but it was still riding the charts for a while. Yeah.
Right. And I was totally into listening to hair metal at that time and getting into that stuff. So I'm kind of shocked that you weren't Stones from the beginning.
No, I never liked the Stones. Yeah,
it happens.
Yeah.
Be like George.
Love them now, man. I've been listening to them so much since, for the last like 25 years. But man, I spent like the first 25 years of my life just like, sorry, when it came to the Stones, I was like, nope. Go figure. All right, why don't we switch gears now? So how about those albums that you kind of dug back in the day or dug a lot, and now you're like,
I'm gonna let George go first so we can get him on.
He's got the big smile on. Well,
Yeah, while it froze up again. But it's let's see. I'll just give you the quick rundown in case I lose you guys again. Albums that I used to listen to all the time and now I'm like over. Escape by Journey. Tired of hearing it. Straight Shooter by Bad Company. Just over that one too.
Really?
Wow.
Yeah. 1984 by Van Halen. When I first bought that album, I literally wasted 2 CDs listening to that. Couldn't get enough of it. Now, if I ever hear it again, I'll be all right by that. And I was this is the odd duck to throw you guys a curveball. Like, Mark Slaughter, the Stick It To You album. I was a fan of Slaughter because I was a fan of Vinnie Vincent Invasion, and he sang for Vinnie Vincent's band. And when he came out with his own band, I was actually a fan. So I listened to it a lot, and then it got so much radio play, and then it got so overdone, and I'm like, you know what? This guy really does suck, and I'm over that.
What song was it again? I'm sorry, I didn't hear the song. What was the song that you said?
Well, Fly to the Angels and or Up All Night, Sleep All Day.
Fly to the Angels. When you say it, I'm singing it in my head. I just wanted you to say it. So
No, I know. There's no way any of us could hit the notes. And the guy was a talented singer. I mean, he was kind of a standout in a sea of like high-pitched hair metal singers. But I really liked what he did on Vinnie Vincent Invasion.
That was actually a pretty solid album, the Vinnie Vincent album.
Yeah, and I really dug that. And they kind of disbanded after one good showing. And then I'm like, well, I'll see what else he's got. And, when they came out with that first album, I was like, wow, and it was the peak of hair metal, 93, 4, somewhere in there. And it was like, you know what? The more I hear it now, if I never hear that again, that's too many. And then,
I for the record, I never liked Slaughter.
Well, again,
and it was actually earlier than 93, 84. That was probably, that Slaughter album came out, 86, 87?
Was it that early? Wow.
I think so. It had to have been, right? That was the same time as Winger and Motley Crue. It was right around that same time. It couldn't have been in the 90s because hair metal was dead by then.
Let's see. Let me see here. Let's say.
Well, I would say that while he's looking that up, I would say that it's certainly that whole group of albums at that time that I was listening to, like the first Poison album.
1990. Sorry to interrupt you.
It was 90? Was that late?
Yeah,
wow.
1990. Yeah.
The first.
So that was
Poison
probably
album.
the last of that wave, because before you know it, the Seattle scene was hitting in, and all that stuff was just gone.
Yep.
But all those albums that I would sit and listen to, the first Poison album, the Dangerous Toys album I think George and I listened to probably nonstop. I would listen to those over and over and over again, but I couldn't make it through 3 songs on those albums at this point. I mean, if I pick and choose the 3 songs, maybe, but if I put it on like it's an album and listen to it from start to finish, I wouldn't get past 3. That stuff was good when it was there for me when I was that age.
At that age,
not that way anymore.
Yeah, no, I totally hear you. Yeah, I mean, like a perfect example of one for me, when Shout at the Devil by Motley Crue came out, and actually Too Fast for Love before it, I was really into both of those albums.
Yeah.
But man, I got off that Motley train pretty shortly thereafter. Once like Home Sweet Home, Girls, I was like, oh, and that was it. And I've never gone back to Motley Crue since then. And like now it's like, and I like I said, I thought Shout at the Devil was a great album when it came out. Now I'm just like, oh, I just don't know what I was thinking back then. But there's a lot of people who love that stuff still, and I get it. It's just not for me anymore. And there's a bunch of others from that kind of era that, I feel the same way. Like, the Scorpions, big Scorpions fan. I still dig the Scorpions, but man, once they started doing albums like Savage Amusement, they lost me.
Who was that in the 80s?
I think it was 88 or something like that. It's just, I was done by that point, and I know this one's gonna pain you, Craig, but I dug Appetite for Destruction when it first came out.
Well, I could have wrote that one down probably.
Yeah, I dug it when it came out, but man, I just I can't listen to it anymore. And I'm not denying its greatness because I know
Yeah.
it's one of the best debuts of all time. It's a classic hard rock record, but I just can't listen to it anymore.
Yeah,
No,
I think. Go ahead, brother.
I think, to be fair, that should be said for most of these, and even the first ones, the vice versa ones. I think there's a level of, I never really hate it. I mean, I appreciate music. If I don't listen to it, that's my personal choice. Obviously, there's tons of people that do, or it wouldn't be popular music. So I think there's a level of when these bands, because what you started to say, Pete, I wrote down most hair metal. That was like on my list, like most hair metal, before I wrote down like Slaughter. And that's like I could name, because like you, in that, I think there was that sloppy time at the end of the 80s where hair metal, grunge was burgeoning, and there was this like lull in quality music. And then once better music started being made, you looked back and like, man, that was really trash, like.
Well, there was a lot of cheese going on there. And
Yeah.
there were some of those bands that were really good, actually. And I think
Absolutely.
I really wish, I know it's so far removed from that time, but I really wish someone would have come up with a better term for that kind of music. Because really, when you think about it, hair metal, I mean, so many of those bands weren't even really metal.
No,
and it's just like they just, we all use it. We all abuse the term, but
sure.
It does injustice to a lot of them, but it's such an easy thing to say, and we all do it. But yeah, there's like this level of cheese about a lot of those bands, but yet there were a lot of really good bands that got lumped into that category. Really good bands that were
tragically.
really
I mean, there was some real flashes, but I'm still a big Tesla fan. I still think they're one of the bright spots in that.
They never should have been ever considered in that
I agree.
Genre. Oh yeah.
They were at their core were a great crunchy blues rock band. That's really
absolutely. That's what I mean, and that's why. And I think that offends me the most is when good bands got lumped into that trash. Because I mean, the hairstyles were what they were in the 80s. I mean, we all had either big hair or mullets or whatever. But I mean, like Van Halen didn't get lumped into that for some reason, even though they were probably as big haired and leopard print as the rest of them.
True.
I don't know why bands like Van Halen and those, I don't know what, I guess Van Halen,
because they were around for a little bit longer before the scene hit. Maybe, I don't know.
Maybe that's probably a valid enough response, I guess. I'm not really sure, but there were certain bands that stuck out and I don't know why. And there were certain bands that blended in that shouldn't have.
Yeah.
I think that was a huge disservice to music in general. Like you said, calling it hair metal and lumping it all together was kind of a disservice to good music at times.
I had one anomaly that I just wanted to bring up real quick before we start tying things around. I grew up loving License to Ill, and I knew that License to Ill and Paul's Boutique were up against each other, next to each other in time frame. And I hated Paul's Boutique, and I've totally flopped those right now. I still like License to Ill. I can still put it on and listen to it, but I really prefer Paul's Boutique a lot more than I do License to Ill at this point. And I know they just had that kind of retrospective on the Apple TV where they talked about the Beastie Boys and their history. But I think there's always going to be albums that maybe even float in and out. Like, I loved Operation Mindcrime when it came out. 10 years ago, if that's a song even came on from that album, I would have turned it off. And now I'm back to, I could listen to some old Queensryche right now. I could really put some of that, that Jet City Woman era and just before that with Operation Mindcrime album, just listen to the whole album again. So I want to throw that last one in
sometimes you need a break from albums that, you maybe have a lot of history with. Another one that I was going to throw out, maybe I need to do, or I've actually had a big break from it, is Metallica's Black Album. I was huge into that. I was such a Metallica fan. You know what? I can't even listen to it anymore. That's exactly how I feel. It's like I used to love that album.
It's like taking a horse pill or something. It's like,
yeah, I mean, we all loved it when it came out, but now I'm like, oh God, if I hear Enter Sandman again, or it's like, oh man. But
and you know what? There's some great songs on that album, but they only play like 3.
Yeah.
They play.
Well, I mean, we all have the ability to go pull it off the shelf and play it. I never do though. I've got this block in my head that Black Album. No, I'm done with it. And I've been done with it.
And honestly, I don't think I could tell you any other songs other than Nothing Else Matters and Enter Sandman off that album. I can't.
Sad
See,
but
like,
true.
Of Wolf and Man and Through the Never are actually really good songs.
Through the Never is very good, yeah.
You'd held a knife to my throat, I wouldn't have been able to tell you any of the songs on there.
But Nothing Else Matters. Oof.
Yeah, no, never again. And I mean, as soon as that, the drum beat starts of Enter Sandman, I turn it off.
I never need to hear that again.
Yeah.
And at the time, I thought that was like, wow, Metallica, the really catchy, heavy song, great. And then little did I know that like in 5 years or so, I'd be like, oh, God, I am exhausted by this track. I never need to hear it again,
Give me Kill 'Em All again, please.
Yeah, exactly. Oh, man. Bruce Springsteen, Born in the USA.
Oh.
I like a lot of Bruce's early stuff. Man, I never need to hear anything off that album again.
Agreed. Eagles' greatest hits. I used to listen to that backwards and forwards, but I can't do it anymore.
And the Eagles have so many great deep tracks that that all they ever play is from that greatest hits album.
The greatest hits album. As soon as I put it on, there's like, I don't like this song. I don't like this.
Isn't
song.
like that the biggest selling album in history? Yeah,
I think it still is. Yeah,
yeah, it was forever, right?
Yeah.
Oh man, anybody got any others as we tie this one up?
George doesn't have any. Boston. He doesn't like Boston anymore.
Did he drop off again?
Yeah, that's why I did that, because I knew he dropped off again. So on record, he just doesn't like to listen to Boston.
There you go. I had a Deep Purple on my list too. Believe it or not, my favorite band of all time, Slaves and Masters. So that's the album.
Oh, really?
Yeah, that's.
You don't like that one anymore?
Not really. I like Joe Lynn Turner as a singer. I liked him in Rainbow with Ritchie Blackmore, but I didn't want to hear Ritchie bring him into Deep Purple because to me it just sounded like a Rainbow Light album, and it's not what I want Deep Purple to sound like. So for me, I liked it at the time. I thought it was fine. But now I'm like, yeah, it was a good idea. They brought Gillan back in, and obviously the rest is history. So, but I was like, I have a hard time listening to Slaves and Masters now.
I would probably say that Power Slave is the same for me with Iron Maiden.
Really?
Yeah,
wow.
I can go back and listen to their earlier stuff, and even the more recent stuff. That middle era is just, it kind of fell into that same place that a lot of the hair metal stuff did for me. It almost sounds campy. I don't know how to put it that way, but
well, Maiden was going for this like kind of really big, grandiose, like kind of epicness right around that time.
Yeah.
And I could see how Power Slave might be a little over the top for you or some people, whereas I think the albums before that are just a little bit more aggressive and
they're 4 on the floor rock. They're a solid rock more than they are kind of an orchestrated or
yeah. Well, Maiden got a lot of big ideas, and they still do that kind of stuff. Yeah. So I think Power Slave was probably the beginning of all that. But I still dig the album. But I think we are not done with having these types of feelings about albums, that this is going to happen for the rest of their lives. I'm sure there's stuff that we've been really getting into the last 10 or 15 years that maybe 5 years from now we're like, you know what? That's it. Don't get why I love that so much. Yeah, exactly. Yes. So I think that's going to continue to happen. So
I know my brother dropped off, but I'm going to get him to listen to My Chemical Romance at some point. We're going to have an album challenge, and I'm going to force him to listen to that album. He's going to like it. I'm telling you.
We'll see what happens, right?
Yeah.
We want to talk to you about music, so reach out to us at musicmusingfeedback@gmail.com.
You can also find us on most social media sites by searching Music Musing or George or Craig Seibert, Sybert.
And you can also find us on Twitter as MusicMusing_ as well.
Thank you for listening to this Music Musing podcast.